Schaffer.
I support free trade, and I support free trade because it is a better substitute than corruption led by corrupt leaders of various countries. If you consider the pressures at our borders, the topic we're discussing today, why so many people want to come to the United States and be part of the robust economy of our country, it is precisely because of this issue. What gets around the corrupt tendencies of world leaders who suppress their population and maintain their power and authority, it is free trade agreements and free trade mechanisms that allows countries on an economic basis to exchange, to have interaction among people who appreciate freedom in a variety of different countries. And if done in a way that elevates the living standard and the human dignity of those who live in corrupt countries today, third world countries and developing countries whose economies continue to be suppressed, that is where we ought to be focused as a nation, on trying to elevate the living standard, starting with our neighbors in our hemisphere and moving outward from there. And yes, we ought to insist, that's what you elect your next senator to do, to insist that trade agreements are fair. But the reality is, constant exchange between nations of commodities, of currency, of individuals, of human activity is the quickest path to prosperity, not only for ourselves, but for those whom we trade with.
The previous question about what to do with 12 to 15 million undocumented workers is too important to leave Congressman Schaffer's characterization of my position unmet. He talked about amnesty, and what I proposed isn't amnesty. In fact, Congressman Schaffer, who wasn't heard for many, many months on his thinking about immigration reform, basically joined me in suggesting that we ought to have an earned path to temporary legal status. Paying a fine and being thrown out of the country if you're a criminal doesn't sound like amnesty.
Mark, that's not true.
To me. Congressman, you ought to clarify your record, because you've tried to have it both ways from what I've read and from what I understand. To trade, when we come, I have to interrupt you, let me finish. When it comes to trade, yes, fair trade has to be combined with free trade. I voted for trade agreements in the Congress that were fair and free. I've opposed others, and I will continue to do so if you hire me to be your next United States Senator. In large part, when you trade goods and services across borders, you don't send armies and the forces to invade other countries. But we have to also support the workers here with a more robust trade assistance plan and program, which this administration has ignored to the great detriment of the middle class and working people of our country.
Boy, the United States of America ought to encourage to the greatest extent possible, as I mentioned before, as a function of free trade and as a function of diplomacy with our neighbors, to allow and to provide incentives for our neighboring countries. We should show the way to help our neighboring countries get beyond the stranglehold of corrupt governments that threaten so many people in our own hemisphere. Mexico, you mentioned specifically. Mexico, for example, continues to insist upon state-owned energy companies, state-owned telecommunications companies, essentially putting government bureaucrats and politicians in charge of the nation's economy. And what we're doing in the United States by failing to insist on a legal system of immigration is creating what I understand to be the second largest source of income, which is remittances, such as people who come here and earn income and send it back to Mexico. Now that's not an incentive for the Mexican officials to try to generate an economy that can allow their people to be self-sustaining and generate an economy that allows them to work with pride and become a great nation that Mexico ought to be. So I would like to see us as Mexico's friends and partners to work hand in hand with trying to help them by the way of leadership and guidance and diplomacy to move forward in a less corrupt, more open, robust economy.
We could help the people of Mexico by passing comprehensive immigration reform and sending clear signals about what it takes to come into our country on the H-1B and the H-2B and the H-1A, particularly the agricultural sector needs. We could also review what we do with our foreign aid monies and make sure they're being targeted to help Mexican citizens in ways that make sense and are overseen in ways that we really see the return on those investments. And finally, I've been a leader on renewable energy in our country, in our state, for the 12 years I've been serving in public office. I've been so honored to have the opportunity to do so. And you all know the stresses that corn-based ethanol, as important as it is, have put on all of our economies. And what we have to do is make a transition to cellulosic feedstocks for our ethanols, at the same time understand this is an enormous opportunity for us. Our corn farmers on the eastern plains are playing an important role but we can do that as well. And finally, when it comes to NAFTA, we can fix it. We don't want to end it, but we want to mend it. We want to make sure that it's more transparent. We want to make sure that people aren't disadvantaged under the agreement that was reached some decade and a half ago. Thank you.